One of the biggest differences between conservatives and progressives comes down to how you view humans, how you view their nature. Are they naturally good with good intentions, or are they naturally bad with bad intentions? Christians, most of the time, believe that humans are born bad, sinful, depraved. From the moment you take your first breath, you only want to do bad things. That is your nature. And that is this concept of original sin. That's what it came from Adam and Eve. They were rebellious, and that was passed down to you. And so now you are naturally rebellious against God, and you've got to get right with him.
So the first Adam came, fell, and all of us in him go down with him, and we're born rebellious. You don't have to learn rebellion. You don't have to learn to sin. You are sinful. I was born sinning. You're born sinning.
And this single belief shapes so much of our government, our political policies, how we view healthcare and education and criminal justice. This is a big one because in Christianity, before you're old enough to talk, your heart is already wicked and deceitful. You cannot trust it. You are naturally selfish and you're naturally flawed. Everything good in you is credited to God's influence, and everything bad in you is credited to your sin nature and Satan's influence. So the default Christian worldview is that people cannot be trusted. People are not good, and they are naturally selfish. And unless they are Christian, which most Christians believe that very few, narrow is the gate, very few people are actually Christians, then that leaves the rest of humanity as bad, sinful, only out for themselves. So in order to get people to behave, they need discipline, rules, and control. And so if you grow up with this belief, and I think a lot of people hold this belief that aren't Christian. I meet them all the time. People who, if you were to ask them, do you believe people are generally good or generally bad? I think a lot of people would say, oh, yeah, humans suck. People suck. People are generally bad. I do not hold that view anymore. I used to for a very long time. But it has been through a lot of therapy and learning about humans, learning about psychology and sociology and mental illness and all kinds of different things that show me that they're not born bad, but they become corrupted and they become traumatized by the world and by other people. And a lot of times what happens to them is outside of their control. And sometimes it's easy to kind of combat that and become better or rise above it, but that's not always the case for everyone. Not everybody has that same opportunity or ability to rise above their own pain and trauma, especially if they've lived a really difficult life that has constantly beat them down and they don't have resources or people in their lives that lift them up and give them the opportunity for a better future. And so these people that believe that everyone is just naturally sinful and naturally bad and just out for themselves and are selfish, this is going to lead to you believing that welfare creates laziness, that people taking advantage of the system are prevalent, and that most people that are receiving benefits from the system are doing so because they're just trying to get something for nothing. They're trying to live off of other people's hard-earned taxpayer dollars. They'll believe that that poor people are poor because of their character or because they don't want to work, not because they are in a tough spot or they never really got the opportunity to get out of poverty because they were born in it, and that's a really tough thing to get out of when you're born into it. They'll believe that criminals always choose crime because they are bad with bad intentions rather than the reality, which is that the majority of crimes committed are financial crimes or property crimes because people are in a hard spot, because people are living in poverty. And that's not to make an excuse. It's just to explain why people do the things that they do. Some people believe that compassion is wasted on people and that most people will just abuse you and abuse your compassion. And so you should be very careful with who you give your compassion to, as if it's in short supply. And so these conservative policies are all built on this idea that people suck. people are bad, and anyone who is in a bad situation and in need of help is most likely doing it to themselves. And instead of getting a handout, instead of getting compassion, what they really need to do is pull themselves up, get to work, and do what the rest of us are doing and earn what they need rather than asking for it. As a progressive, I see people not as out to get something for nothing or lazy or bad. I see people as shaped by their trauma, their poverty, their lack of opportunity, their environments, their mental health barriers, education access, healthcare access. There are so many factors that create the people that we become. And I talk about in this channel historically, I've talked about personal responsibility and how I find it really difficult to place full responsibility on every individual for their lives because so much of what happens to us and shapes us is outside of our control. And how we respond to it is even sometimes outside of our control because the brain is a wild thing and we don't even know what's going on in there the majority of the time. And what we're thinking and what we're experiencing at the forefront is just a small part of all of the processes going on underneath that impact our behavior, impact how we live in the world. And so it's hard for me to say that people are solely responsible for themselves and everything that happens to them because I know that that's not true. And so in this worldview, people are not problems that you're supposed to control and put all these rules on. People are shaped by things that have happened to them, and our systems that are in place need to work better so that when people are in hard times or people are impacted by bad things, they can rise above it, they can get out of it, we can help them rather than shame them and punish them and make them feel as though they are fully responsible for everything that has happened to them. And it's funny because I think this is exactly what Jesus's worldview would have been according to his behaviors and the way he treated people. Because progressives believe that when you feed the poor, they thrive. They don't they don't just keep taking handouts. They get better, they do better, they get a job, they make money, and then they don't have to rely on these support systems to eat because they can now feed themselves. And it is human nature, it is human psychology to want to be able to provide for yourself, to take care of yourself. And so most people don't want to receive handouts. Feeding people doesn't create a worse society, it doesn't create worse people. It gives people what they need so that they can do better, so that they can thrive. Progressives believe that when you provide people with health care and people aren't as sick, they also thrive. They do better. You have healthier, happier communities full of people that aren't going into debt because they get sick. Healthcare should be a human right. If we exist and we are alive and we are being poisoned by corporations, by all these things that poison our air, poison our water, and cause us to have health problems, then we should be afforded the healthcare that we need to survive those health problems and to do better. When you give people healthcare, you reduce crime rates. When people are healthier and they know that they can be well, then they don't resort to crime to pay for their medical bills. When you invest in children, then they improve as adults. They become more functioning, more productive members of society. When you support marginalized groups, then the communities in those groups grow and they do better. And so, in all of these situations where conservatives or Republicans will look at people and say, "Oh, you want healthcare because you don't want to work to pay for your healthcare. You want food because you don't want to work to pay for your food." That's the progressives look at people and they say, "Oh, you want more food because you're hungry and because when you don't eat, you can't really do much else. When you can't afford anything because you're not paid enough, then you're going to probably resort to crime just so you can survive. So we're going to pay you more." Um, it's a different way, it's a different worldview. I remember growing up in the church and being taught that we were not like the world, that Christians had a different worldview.
Everybody has a worldview. Really, the only question is, which worldview do you have? And so worldview is essentially the decision-making filter that every person has. We're trying to figure out who we are. How does the world work? How do I fit within it? Where am I going? What kind of life do I want to live? How can I live it? Those are all worldview questions because they're based on basic life principles, philosophical principles, if you will.
And they're right. They do have a very different worldview than I do. We see all of humanity and existence completely opposite ends of the spectrum. And the same goes for conservatives and progressives. Progressives look out and they see a bunch of people who have been beaten down by the system and oppressed and starved and their healthcare taken away. And they think, wow, if those people could just get some food and see a doctor and have a living wage, then those people might thrive. They might do better. But Republicans see those people and they say, well, if we give them food and healthcare and raise their wages, they're just going to keep asking for more and they're going to do less. But the data doesn't show that. The data shows that when you take care of people from the ground up, that you achieve the things you want, which is a happier, healthier, more successful, safer society. And it's not that progressives are naive. It's that we see humanity through a lens of psychology and sociology. We have data and science and facts to support this idea that helping people does not hurt a society, but it helps a society. Whereas Republicans are operating from, again, theology. And there is no data or science to back this up that all these people are so bad and selfish and just want and want to take. There is nothing that backs that up, but Republicans are convinced and will have you convinced that that's exactly what the problem is. And so you now have two political parties that are trying to solve problems that come from completely different assumptions about human nature and how humans react to the solutions that you're offering. You have conservatives saying that when people suffer, well, they do better. They learn something. Whereas progressives see suffering as something that stunts our potential and our ability to thrive. Conservatives see people and say they need discipline, they need rules, they need control. Progressives see people and they say they need resources and support and compassion and care. So we're not just arguing about policy, we're actually arguing about the fundamental nature of humanity. And that is why this is such a difficult thing to approach. It's such a difficult conversation because we don't even see reality as the same. We're not operating from the same reality. Everything circles back to the question of, do we think that people need consequences and punishment and rules by the government? Or do we think that people need support and help and resources and someone to just show them a better way and give them the opportunity for a better way? And I think it's important also to let conservatives know, like, they don't have to be the most empathetic person in the world. They don't have to care about everyone else. You can literally spin progressive policy as a way to improve their lives, because if they want less crime, if they want a happier, healthier society to live in so that they can be happier and healthier, then they're going to want to help their neighbors, and they're going to want to make sure their neighbors have what they need to thrive so that their neighbors aren't committing crime in their streets. And once you believe that people are naturally bad, the next idea makes perfect sense, that people must be punished, not helped.